Good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. Today is 17 September 2024, and today we have some important articles for the discussion. And without any further delay, let's get into the discussion. And you all knew that yesterday there was a one prelims practice question. The question is, in economy, Kuznets theory is related to which of the following things? Option A, GDP per capita, option B, inequality, option C, fiscal deficit, and option D, population growth. However, so when we talk about the Kuznets curve or Kuznets theory in economy, it is related to the inequality, right? So inequality is the correct answer for this question. So therefore, the correct answer for this question is option B. So you very often come across a term called Kuznets curve in economy. So Kuznets curve specifically, describes about the inequality which is prevalent or persists in an economy. So therefore, the correct answer for this question is option B, inequality. And if you look at this Kuznets curve and its explanation, a Kuznets curve on economic growth of any country and income distribution. So that specifically led to Kuznets, a person, an economist, coming out a hypothesis that industrializing nations or nations which have been moving in on an industrialized path, so they usually experience, first there will be a rise in the inequality, right? So first there will be increased inequality levels in industrializing nations, and once they reach a particular point, a turning point, the inequality in such industrialized or industrializing nations would start declining, and that is what the Kuznets curve usually talks about, right? So it talks about, first there will be increased inequalities in industrialized or industrializing economies, and at particular saturation point the inequality level started declining, and in fact when charted, this trajectory appears as an inverted U shape. This usually looks an inverted U shape, and this is also known as the Kuznets curve, right? So today also we have one prelims practice question. This is also very important, and this is with respect to climate change and global environmental protocols. And global methane pledge is an initiative, is an effort to cut methane emissions, because methane is also one of the potential greenhouse gas, right? The global methane pledge is an effort to cut methane emissions by the end of this decade, is led by which of these following countries? Option A, India and US, option B, US and European Union, and option C, India and European Union, and option D, India, US and European Union. So this is very important question, and try to answer this question in the comment section. And the first article or the editorial that we are going to discuss, and which is very important, and it is with respect to women empowerment or political empowerment of women, if I say specifically. And in fact, this is a woman-led development in Rajya Sabha, and how it will lead to the participation of women in political arena, and what are the steps which were taken in the Rajya Sabha with the aim or with the objective of empowering women or giving greater role to women in the functioning of the Rajya Sabha, is what we are going to understand. And we very often come across the term in recent times, that is woman-led development. So woman-led development in the sense that giving women a greater role in the development, and making it more and more inclusive. And the very same phrase of woman-led development was recognized as one of the 6 focal points during India's presidency of the G20 summit. So we all knew that in the year 2023, India was the president of the G20 summit, and in this presidency of G20 summit, women-led development was the focal point, and it has always been the cornerstone of the government's priorities and also policies. And we come across the recent 33% of reservation for women in the parliament, particularly in the Lok Sabha and also state legislative assemblies. So we all knew about that. And apart from that, gender budgeting is also another initiative which is being implemented gender budgeting is also implemented to make sure that women get adequate allocations. And also, all these things have been emphasizing that the government's increasing priorities, increasing policy initiatives, mainly targeting women, and that is in line with the woman-led development. And under this particular approach of woman-led development, women are not just the beneficiaries of these developmental programs, but women also set the agenda for the development as well, and we also look into that as well. At a time, women are playing a very important role in the arena of governance, and even they are they are coming up with or playing a very important role at the global level, particularly in the developmental initiatives, or the world has been focusing on woman-centric developmental approach. Now, in this particular backdrop, India's legislature, particularly India's parliament or India's state legislative assemblies, so they are considered as a pivotal organ of India's democracy, right? So they indicate that India is a functional democracy, India is a healthy democracy. So therefore, since women have been playing a very important role at the global level, India's legislature cannot afford to left behind, and in fact India's women should also have active participation. India's women should also have a more membership in the India's legislature, which is considered as a pivotal organ of its democracy. Now, particularly in this backdrop, so the Vice President of India and Chairman of Rajya Sabha, Jagdeep Dhankar. So he is the Vice President of India and also Chairman of Rajya Sabha. So we all knew that whoever is Vice President of India, so they're going to be the chairman of Rajya Sabha without being the member of the Rajya Sabha. And in fact, the chairman of the Rajya Sabha has introduced a slew of progressive measures. A lot of progressive measures are being introduced in the proceedings of the House as well as in the Secretariat, and these particular proceedings or these initiatives specifically aims at the political participation of women. Okay, so they aimed at the political participation of a woman, particularly in the upper house, that is Rajya Sabha. And we all knew that the parliament has passed the Nari Shakti Vandana Abhiyan. So what is this Nari Shakti Vandana Abhiyan? So this is a women's reservation bill which is providing 33% of reservation for women in the Lok Sabha in particular and parliament in general, and even the state legislative assemblies. So that is Nari Shakti Vandana Abhiyan or Women's Reservation Bill. And Mr. Jagdeep Dhankar, in a historic move, has decided to reconstitute a panel of vice chairpersons to include only women. So this essentially means that, so along with the chairman of Rajya Sabha, so there will be a panel of vice chairmen as well. So in the absence of chairman of the Rajya Sabha, so any of the members from the panel of these vice chairpersons will conduct the sessions of the Rajya Sabha. So therefore, Jagdeep Dhankar, Vice President and Chairman of Rajya Sabha, has decided to reconstitute the panel of Vice Chairpersons to Rajya Sabha, and this panel will constitute women only. So that is in line with the greater involvement, greater interference or active participation of women in the political activities or the proceedings of the Rajya Sabha. And in fact, eminent athletes such as P.T. Usha also created a history by becoming the first nominated MP, first nominated MP in the history of India to become the vice chairperson of the Rajya Sabha. So this is very important. You just remember this because there is also a scope of asking questions based on this, right? So in fact, P.T. Usha, an eminent athlete, and she was nominated to the Rajya Sabha. But even though she was nominated to the Rajya Sabha, she was the first nominated MP in the history of Rajya Sabha to become the chairperson, vice chairperson of the Rajya Sabha. And in fact, we all knew that in the year 2023, India was the president of the G20 summit. So in this G20 summit, the G20 group of countries have come up with the New Delhi Leaders Declaration, G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration. And this particular New Delhi Declaration has also highlighted the need for empowerment of women, or empowerment of all women and girls, has a multiplier effect on, or multiplier effect in implementation or the overall success of 2030 agenda for the sustainable development goals. Remember, time and again I have been emphasizing that United Nations has come up with 17 sustainable development goals, and these 17 sustainable development goals including several important goals such as zero hunger, no poverty, universal health care, education for all, and gender equality. So everything, so all those 17 goals are considered as sustainable development goals, and UN has also aimed to achieve these sustainable development goals by 2030. But New Delhi Declaration has underscored that investing in the empowerment of women and girls will help in achieving success in 2030 agenda for the sustainable developmental goals. And in fact, India is already working tirelessly towards achieving the goal 5.5, because sustainable development goal number 5 talks about the gender equality. Please also go through the 17 sustainable development goals. They are very, very important from your exam point of view, right? So in prelims examination, you may get the question of matching those sustainable development goal number 1 deals with what, goal number 2 deals with what. So that's how questions are being asked. So therefore, India is already working tirelessly to achieve the goal 5.5 of sustainable development goal, or SDG, and this goal 5.5 calls for women's full and effective participation and also equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of the decision making. Now in this backdrop, it is very significant, and it is one such initiative at the highest level of Indian Parliament, and it would also set a great example to emulate in other organizations across India, and that will ensure a political participation or active participation of women in the political sphere, and also overall it would lead to the empowerment of women in India. And next important article is about the emergency provisions and center state relations. And I hope you basically knew about article 356 of the Indian Constitution, because 356 of the Indian Constitution deals with the president's rule. So however, in recent times there have been time and again allegations from the states that the union government has been violating article 356, and it has been arbitrarily misusing article 356 and imposing the president's rule in states in an undemocratic manner, right? So how these emergency provisions, particularly article 356, has been impacting the center state relations, and that is what we are going to understand in this particular article. And this is very important from gender studies paper 2 perspective, because gender studies paper 2 we have a constitution and polity. So this is a very, very important question from both prelims perspective and mains perspective as well. So we all knew that in recent times we have been observing violence in Myanmar between Meiteis and Kuki ethnic groups in the state of state of Manipur. I'm sorry about that. So there were increased demands from different groups that the center must use the president's rule under article 356, and center must take control of the state of Manipur and its law and order situation. So that is the demand. So therefore this violence in the state of Manipur has reignited the discussion about the role of emergency provisions, particularly article 356 and also article 365 of the Indian Constitution, and how these emergency provisions will impact the India's federal structure, right? So emergency provisions cannot be used in an arbitrary and undemocratic manner, and that has not been provided by the Constitution and even Supreme Court of India as well. So therefore we are going to understand how these emergency provisions, particularly article 356 and article 365, are going to impact the center-state relations going ahead. And this particular debate and discussion focuses on the use of emergency provisions under Article 355 of the Constitution and also Article 356 of the Indian Constitution, especially in the backdrop of the ongoing crisis or violence in the state of Manipur. And first and foremost, we need to understand, we all knew that India is a federal republic, or we have a federation which is which has provided a strong center, right? So the balance of power leaned towards the center or shifted towards the center in the federation, right? So in fact, in a federation that has been provided by the Indian Constitution, there is a proper division of powers between the union government and also the respective state governments. And in fact, the division of powers between the union government and also the state governments has been provided by the Constitution, particularly in the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution. Remember, we have as of now 12 schedules, and all these 12 schedules are very, very important for your prelims examination, right? Because previously there were a number of questions which were asked based on these schedules. So however, coming to this discussion, so 7th schedule deals with the division of powers between the union government and also state government, and states are primarily responsible for maintaining law and order within their territories, right? So the law and order is under the state subject within the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution. So states are primarily responsible for maintaining law and order within their respective territories. However, Indian Constitution has also provided for the emergency provisions. So we have national emergency and we also have the state emergency, or we could say it is a president rule as well. For example, so when we talk about the national emergency, Article 352 deals with the national emergency, and the president's rule deals with Article 365 of the Indian Constitution, or 356 of the Indian Constitution deals with the president's rule. So this division of powers provided that the law and order is a state subject. So therefore, it is the primary responsibility of the state to manage or maintain the law and order situation. So however, so when we talk about the emergency provisions which are being provided by the Indian Constitution, so emergency provision is always a unique feature of the Indian Constitution, and this emergency provisions allows the center to assume wide powers so as to handle the special situation or any contingency which may arise at the national level or within one part of India. So in order to deal with such emergency, such contingency in a much more effective and efficient manner, the Indian Constitution has provided for the emergency provisions. And in fact, these emergency provisions are provided under part 18 of the Indian Constitution. This particular part contains the emergency provisions. So however, Constitution of India provided for 3 different kinds of abnormal situations, and these 3 different types of abnormal situations calls for a departure from the normal governmental machinery set up by the Constitution. So whenever there will be president's rule or a national emergency, that specifically indicates that there is a departure or deviation from the normal government machinery which has been established by the Indian Constitution. As I have already told you that national emergency deals with Article 352 of the Indian Constitution, and this national emergency can be declared by the president due to war, external aggression, or armed rebellion. These are the grounds through in those grounds national emergency can be imposed. So state emergency or president's rule under Article 356 of the Indian Constitution. So failure of the constitutional machinery in states would lead to the presidential rule, or Article 356 will be imposed in a particular state. Now the concern is that the union government has been time and again misusing Article 356 of the Indian Constitution to impose a president's rule in an opposition ruled states, and that is a cause of concern, and that has also been impacting the federal provisions of the center state relations. And financial emergency is under Article 360 of the Indian Constitution. These are 3 different articles which specifically deals with the emergency provisions in the Indian Constitution. However, so we'll try to understand the basic differences between the national emergency or state emergency, which is also known as the president's rule. State emergency is also known as the president's rule. So the basic difference between national emergency and state emergency is that national emergency can be imposed in situations of war, external aggression, or even armed rebellion, right? So these are these are the grounds based on which the national emergency can be imposed. However, when we talk about the state emergency, so in situations of failure of the constitutional machinery in a state, a president's rule can be imposed under Article 356 of the Indian Constitution. 356 of the Indian Constitution, and this is Article 352 of the Indian Constitution, right? So whenever national emergency is declared in India, so no authority to the center to suspend the constitution in a state. So there will be no suspension of constitution in a state, and center also does not have any authority to do so. However, with respect to state emergency or the president rule, the effect is that the Council of Ministers or COM, Council of Ministers, would be dissolved, vacating the office of Chief Minister. Furthermore, Vidhan Sabha is either prorogued or dissolved, necessitating a new election. So there will be a new election in case a prolonged or continuation of the president's rule which has been imposed in a particular state under Article 356 of the Indian Constitution. However, whenever national emergency is declared, so it certainly affects the fundamental rights except Article 21, right to life and personal liberty of the Indian Constitution. So it affects the remaining fundamental rights as well. However, whenever the president's rule is declared in one particular state under Article 356, so there will be no effect on the fundamental rights. So people who are individuals who are living in one particular state, so they will enjoy all the fundamental rights similar to the people in other parts of India. But on the other hand, whenever the national emergency is imposed, so it certainly affects the fundamental rights. And after that, the center-state relationship should also be understood from the national emergency perspective and also state emergency perspective. So when we talk about the center-state relationship, the relationship of all the states with center changes with respect to national emergency. And when we talk about the state emergency, the relationship of only one state where this presidential rule has been imposed changes, its relations with the center changes. And when we talk about the proclamation of national emergency, so it is approved by the parliament within 1 month and thereafter every 6 months. In order to further continue the national emergency, parliamentary approval is necessary for every 6 months, and there is no maximum duration prescribed for the national emergency by the Indian Constitution. However, with respect to the president's rule, so once it is approved by the parliament within 2 months of imposing Article 356 of presidential rule, and thereafter every 6 months. However, with respect to presidential rule, there is a maximum period that remains in force up to 3 years. And these are the basic differences between the national emergency and the state emergency. However, what are the judicial interpretations with respect to misuse of Article 356 of the Indian Constitution? So, if you look at the judicial interpretations, historically Article 356 has been misused time and again, and there were a lot of accusations and allegations by the respective state governments over the misuse of Article 356 by the center to dismiss elected state governments for reasons not strictly related to the constitutional breakdown. Rather, Article 356 has been used mostly in the opposition ruled states, which is unconstitutional and arbitrary in nature. However, there was one landmark judgment of the Supreme Court which considers federalism as a basic structure, is part of the basic structure, which was the SR Bommai case of 1994. And in this particular case, Supreme Court has restricted the misuse of Article 356, and in fact the Supreme Court has also clearly stated that the Article 356 should only be used in cases of constitutional machinery breakdown and is subjected to the judicial review, right? So there is nothing like imposition of Article 356 is out of the purview of the judicial review of the judiciary, but imposition of Article 356 is also it also comes under the judicial review. So judicial review generally means the Supreme Court will look into the legality of imposing Article 356. So subsequent rulings of the Supreme Courts have further expanded the scope of Article 355 and allowing the Union to take actions to protect states and also ensure the constitutional governance in those respective states. However, so whenever you write any answer with respect to the center-state relations, you have to write so the Sarkaria Commission recommendations, Punchi Commission recommendations, Law Commission recommendations, and second Administrative Reforms Commission recommendations, and also any recommendations which are being provided by the National Commission to review working of the Constitution, and also Punchi Commission 2010. So Sarkaria Commission on Center-State Relations has recommended that or suggested that Article 355 of the Indian Constitution should empower the Union to take necessary actions for the state protection and governance, or protection of administrative machinery, or protection of law and order situation in the state, and that is the recommendation of the Sarkaria Commission. However, the National Commission for Review to review the working of the Constitution and Punchi Commission have emphasized on Article 356, and it should be used only as the last resort in extreme cases or extreme situations, right? So next important articles is about the Project Cheetah. So we all knew that India has no cheetah population, and in fact Asiatic cheetahs population in India, because of extreme hunting and poaching, so it went to extinct way back in 1950s. So since then we do not have Asiatic cheetah population. So at any cost we wanted to reintroduce cheetahs into our Indian ecosystem. So there were attempts to translocate these cheetahs from the African continent, particularly countries like South Africa and Namibia. And in fact, so we have successfully translocated around 20 cheetahs from both Namibia and South Africa. So this project has commemorated 2 years, right? So 2 years since this project has been launched. So we'll just assess the success of the project, whether so what are the shortcomings, and whether this project is a successful project or not. So we'll try to understand this. And in fact, in India, cheetah reintroduction program is considered as ambitious project of the central government for reintroducing cheetahs into India's habitat. And in fact, this particular cheetah reintroduction program has completed 2 years. And in fact, cheetahs in India declared extinct way back in the year 1952, immediately after India's independence. And the Cheetah Action Plan is an India's initiative, right? So Cheetah Reintroduction Program or Cheetah's Action Plan is an India's initiative to reintroduce African cheetahs into the Indian ecosystems. Now, what is Project Cheetah? So we have to understand about this particular project. So we all knew that since it is 2 years that the Project Cheetah has been launched, and this particular project was launched in the year 2022. So when we talk about the Project Cheetah, so it is India's ambitious attempt to introduce African cats in the wild in the country. And so some characteristic features of cheetahs were: cheetahs are carnivore species, and it is only large carnivore species in India that went extinct after India has got independence, and that this is also a very significant. You just have to understand about this. And the project is considered as the first ever intercontinental translocation project of these big cats. So now, why this is known as intercontinental translocation project? Because these cheetahs are translocated from the African continent to the Asian continent, because of that particular reason. And in fact, it is also the first ever intercontinental translocation project of these big cats. Now, as part of this Project Cheetah, 20 cheetahs have been brought from both Namibia and South Africa, and they were introduced in a national park in Madhya Pradesh, which is the Kuno Palpur National Park. And so far, 8 cheetahs have been brought to India from Namibia in September 2022, and 12 cheetahs were brought to India from South Africa in February 2023. So you can also go through some facts with respect to the cheetahs population, right? So it is oldest of all big cat species, and in fact a number of cheetahs worldwide, just 7,500 individuals globally. And the other important fact about Asiatic cheetahs is Asiatic cheetahs population found only in Iran, right? So these cheetahs which we are bringing back to India are African cheetahs, and Asiatic cheetahs are critically endangered species, right? So what is the current status of this cheetah reintroduction program, and how many cheetahs were still surviving, how many cheetahs were died? So since they arrived in India, so as of now, so 8 adult cheetahs have died. So out of 8 adult cheetahs, so 3 cheetahs are female and 5 are male cheetahs, so they were died. And apart from that, 17 cubs have been born in India, so with 12 cubs have been surviving, bringing the total number of cheetahs including these cubs in Kuno Palpur National Park to 24. So currently all these cheetahs were put in an enclosure, so to make sure that these cheetahs are acclimatized with the existing conditions. Now what are the objectives of the cheetah reintroduction program? Why these cheetahs are being reintroduced into the India's habitat? So introduce African cheetahs to India to conserve the species and also restore the degraded dry open forest or savanna ecosystems. And these cheetahs are intended to boost ecotourism, and they also expected to benefit the local communities as well. And in fact, the cheetah population is expected to reach Kuno Palpur's carrying capacity for about or within 15 years, and the wider landscape within 30 to 40 years after the introduction of this cheetah reintroduction program. Now why Kuno Palpur National Park is selected for the introduction of cheetahs is because the most suitable location of this particular national park, and in fact it also has a large prey base, and that will help sustain the cheetah population in this national park. So however, cheetahs as of now held in captive, and they are now in enclosures, and they're not yet released from these enclosures, because in order to ensure the survivability and sustenance of those cheetahs. And additional sites are also being considered, such as Bunny grasslands in Gujarat are also being considered, and so it is expected that Bunny grasslands in Gujarat have the favorable conditions to release more and more African cheetahs into these grasslands. And also Naura Dehi Wildlife Sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh, so they are being considered for the cheetah introduction, right? So next, a very important article or editorial which is given in the Hindu newspaper is that so Indian military exports to Israel, and so how these Indian military exports have been aiding the genocide in Gaza. Because in recent times Israel has been attacking the Hamas, and Hamas is located in Gaza Strip, and in this all-out attacks of Israel in Gaza has led to the humanitarian crisis where a lot of civilians are being killed. And recently a petition was filed in the Supreme Court saying that India should stop exporting arms and ammunition to Israel, because that has been financing, and these arms and ammunition has been led to the Israel committing this genocide in Gaza. So however, the Supreme Court has declined to entertain that particular petition. Supreme Court immediately dismissed the petition, saying that so we are not going to interfere in the executive decisions, right? So in this context we'll try to understand everything about this particular petition and why Supreme Court has rejected this. The Supreme Court of India has recently dismissed a petition by former civil servants, academics and activists in the particular case of Ashok Kumar Sharma and others versus Union of India case. So what is this petition? This petition is all about suspending or ordering the government of India to suspend existing and future licenses for the export of military equipment to Israel from India. And the petition has cited some concerns over international humanitarian law violations amid the ongoing conflict in Gaza. However, the court's decision has led to raising certain questions about the judicial review limits on the executive's foreign policy decisions, because it will lead to the encroachment of the powers of the executive. Right, so we have the principle of separation of powers, and if judiciary stops the executive to sell arms to Israel, so that will lead to the interference or involvement or even encroachment on the executive organ of the or executive branch of the government. So that's the major question here. Right, so what are the limits of the judicial review? That is what we have to understand here. The Supreme Court has declined to rule on the merits of this particular case, and Supreme Court instead focused on the procedural aspects of the case alone, a petition alone. And in fact, Supreme Court has also stated that international obligations are not binding in this context. Why not binding in this context? Because Israel was not party to this particular case, and because of that reason the international obligations will not be binding. And this particular approach of the Supreme Court has also overlooks the fact that the challenge was directed at the Indian government and Indian companies, but not at Israel. And in fact, the court's reasoning while dismissing this petition has been in contradictory with the previous judgments of the Supreme Court alone. And in fact, the previous judgments of the Supreme Court have emphasized on interpreting the domestic law in the light of the international obligations, and those were the previous Supreme Court judgments which have emphasized on this particular principle of interpreting domestic law in the light of international obligations. However, despite ICJ's or International Court of Justice detailed orders or even obligations under certain conventions such as the Genocide Convention, the Supreme Court has failed to enforce these international norms respectively. And even the Supreme Court has also cited the potential breaches of the contract with the other country, and also leads to the fallout as reasons for this dismissing of petitions. And the court will also not interfere in the executive branch of the government and the decisions are taken by the executive wing of the government with respect to the foreign relations. And the Supreme Court has also overlooked the government could actually invoke the force majeure, and this force majeure will ensure the government to halt arms exports due to international legal obligations, thus prioritizing commercial interests over the humanitarian concerns. So therefore, fallout of the decision is that Supreme Court's dismissal could leads to impeding efforts to halt the military aid to Israel. And so we can say that the Supreme Court's dismissal of this particular petition will virtually stop efforts from India to stop a humanitarian crisis or genocide in Gaza that has been taking place. So this is the author's opinion, and in fact the inaction on the part of the Supreme Court might also contribute to the ongoing devastation and even the criticism of Israel's conduct as well. And this decision underscores the constraint of judicial review over the executive actions involving the foreign policy of India with other countries, especially in contexts involving humanitarian law and violations. So it also highlights the gap in enforcing international legal commitments within the domestic legal frameworks as well, and these things have to be looked into. And Supreme Court's decision or Supreme Court's overall stance has raised a significant concerns about India's adherence to its legal obligations, potentially undermining global trust in India's commitment to human rights and even humanitarian laws as well. Right, so today we have a very important mains practice question, so we'll try to solve this question as well. Right, so the question is about the increasing trade deficit with China. The question is, a dependence on Chinese imports continues to increase despite governments pushed for manufacturing in the country, and that has been leading to a large trade deficit with China. Now analyze its implications on Indian economy and also enumerate certain measures that are needed to bridge the trade deficit. Right, this is the question and this we have to address, and this is very important from the Gender Studies paper 2 perspective and also Gender Studies paper 3 perspective as well. From these perspectives, this particular question is very important. And what is the approach? Right, so what should be the approach here? So the approach is that introduce India's excessive dependence on China for imports, and then discuss reasons for this trade deficit with China, and then suggest mitigation measures that will help reduce dependence on China, and conclude the answer by writing a way forward. So that is how you can build an approach for this particular question. So in the introduction, so you could briefly introduce some data, some facts with respect to the growing trade deficit between India and China. So the latest data which was released by the China Customs Department, and this data shows that so India's trade deficit with China has been reached 100 billion for the first time in the year 2022. And in fact, China is a country with which India has the largest amount of trade deficit, and there is a need to bridge this gap between the trade between India and China. And this is countering the Atmanirbhar Bharat goals, especially the ongoing geopolitical tensions between these two countries. And dependence on Chinese imports continues to increase despite a government's push for manufacturing in the country, and also the inability to reduce China's influence often gets voiced in the call for boycott of Chinese goods. Right, so overall we could say that there is a huge trade deficit between India and China, and this trade deficit has been continues to increase. Now what is a trade deficit? I hope you knew some basics with respect to this. So trade deficit essentially means that India has been importing more goods than what it has been exporting to China. So right, so the differences between export and import is known as the trade deficit. So in case we have been importing more than what we are exporting to China, so that is the trade deficit, and this trade deficit has been increasing despite government's sustained push for giving or reviving the manufacturing sector in the country. And the inability to reduce China's influence often gets voiced in the call for boycott of Chinese goods. And what are the reasons for the trade deficit? We have to understand the reasons for this trade deficit. So most imports, most of the goods that we import from China are intermediate goods used by the Indian manufacturers. So therefore we need to have a strong intermediate goods value chain in India itself, so that will help us reduce our trade deficit. That will also help us reduce our dependence on China. And in fact, there is also a sharp rise in chemicals and engineering equipment import from China. So this chemicals and engineering import equipment including electrical and non-electrical instruments, and it is driving a large part of imports growth from China. And they are used in manufacturing sector here. Cheaper Chinese goods are also powering India's green transition, digital economy, and even the latest real estate and also the construction boom as well. So however, the growth of Chinese manufacturing sector in the last few decades, if you look at the manufacturing sector in China in the last few decades, there has been a substantial growth, whereas Indian manufacturing sector has remained sluggish and it even comparatively inefficient when we make comparisons between China and India's manufacturing. However, so because of very close geographical proximity between India and China and lower prices of Chinese goods, and those Chinese goods are more competitive because of that particular reason, so they are more cheaper and also economically efficient to import from China rather than producing domestically. So that is one reason because of which we have a huge trade deficit with China. So what are the mitigation measures? We need to adopt certain mitigation measures in this context. So those mitigation measures includes that as of now there are no shortcuts for reducing the trade deficit with China or excessive dependence on China. Rather, we need to have a long-term policy, a long-term sustained policy, and this policy should boost or empower Indian manufacturing, particularly the intermediate goods or particularly the goods which we have been importing more from China. At the same time, government will need to look for alternative suppliers for many important raw and intermediate goods from China. So India is not alone in looking for these alternatives, right? So the whole world is now talking about China plus one strategy and also looking for the better alternatives to China as well. So there are certain government measures also. So these government measures also aimed to reduce dependence on China or reduce the trade deficit, reduce the trade with China. So if you look at those government measures, so scrutinizing Chinese investments is the first measure that has been followed by the Indian government. So this scrutinizing this particular measure aimed at keeping Chinese companies out of the 5G trials. Secondly, curbing opportunistic takeover of Chinese domestic firms. So FDA restrictions on China. And thirdly, cutting import dependency for active pharmaceutical ingredients and even promotion of bulk drug parks and production linked incentives. So what should be the way forward for reducing dependence on China? So there's a way forward. The way forward is that India can diversify independence by working more with US, Europe, South Korea, and even Japan. Right? So we need to diversify the existing supply chain networks, and we need to achieve the supply chain resilience. So this way it will increase its reliance on countries which it also enjoys a good political relations. So providing further impetus to self-reliance in major sectors where India is a net importer is a prudent way forward, where technology and capital will have a huge role to play. Right? So that's how you could write a way forward for this question, and that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.